In this video, I'm going to be showing you how I converted the front brake of my Kawasaki S1 554 from a single disc to a twin disc. My recently finished Kawasaki S1 554 had its original S3 single disc brake on the left hand side, and I needed to convert it to a twin disc to make it work better, but on the other side there's no lugs for the caliper to bolt to. So what I need to do is get a spare left hand fork slider, fit it on the right hand side with the brake lugs pointing forwards, and then reposition the mudguard brackets. As seen here on my Kawasaki S1B 415 that I made in 1996. On the right hand side of the wheel is a chrome plated cover held on with 2 screws. If this is removed, it reveals 4 tapped holes in the hub for holding a second disc. So the first thing I had to do was find a left hand fork slider that I can modify. And this one's in nice condition with no major marks or scratches, so that's just perfect for the job. Before I can start modifying the fork leg, I need to take some measurements to ensure that I get the mudguard mounting bracket in the right place in relation to the caliper bracket. To do this, I compressed it on my surface table and used the slip gauges to measure the gaps. I rest the fork leg onto the surface table, pressing down hard to ensure that it sits square onto the mounting points of the mudguard. Then I can use my box of slip gauges to measure up from the surface table to the caliper mounting brackets. The slip gauges come in various thicknesses, and it's just trial and error to get the exact thickness that you need. Eventually I get to the block that won't slide underneath. This means it's too thick. So now I'll go back a couple of blocks and you can add thin blocks to it until the blocks slide just nicely underneath the fork leg. With the gap measurement established, I can now use this sit block to set the exact gap when I reverse the fork leg round. So I'll put it somewhere safe for now so it doesn't get lost. The next thing I need to do is very carefully drill through the mudguard mounting bracket with a tapping drill till the hole comes out the rear side, then thread the hole. The tapping drill for an M8 thread is 6.8mm, and this is a nice tight fit in the thread, so now I can put it back in my vise and use my electric drill to drill through. With both the holes drilled, the next thing I need to do is cut a new M8 thread. I start initially by running the tap through the existing M8 thread until it starts cutting into the metal at the back. There we go, that's just perfect. So now I need to cut off the other parts of the lug that I no longer need. Using my hacksaw, I take some very careful cuts. I can't cut all the way because I might scratch the other part of the fork leg, so I go down as far as I can, then move the fork and cut down a bit further on the other side and a bit up from underneath, and then I can use a hammer and gently tap it till it fractures off. The cast aluminium is quite brittle and the lug falls straight off perfectly, so now I can take a quick measurement with my vernier caliper so I can mark out the other side and cut it in the same place. This lug's a lot harder to reach with a hacksaw blade, so I have to take little cuts, but we get through in the end. With both the lugs removed, I can now return the fork leg to my surface table, use that slip pack from earlier on, putting it underneath the caliper brackets this time to measure the depth for the new mudguard mounting brackets. So I hold it down with my thumb secure, measure with my vernier caliper up to the surface of the fork lug, and it's 30mm. So I'll make the lug just slightly longer than 30mm so I can adjust it to size. I'll make some new lugs on my lathe from a bar of 6082 aluminium. This is just perfect for this sort of application and it welds lovely. Over to my lathe, I slide the bar into the 3-jaw chuck and tighten the jaws securely. Then I do some measurements on the existing lugs so I can replicate them. The existing lugs are 20mm diameter at the big end and the bar is slightly over about 22, so that's just perfect. So I can start machining the initial diameter to 20mm. I machined down the diameter long enough to make 2 new lugs. With the bar machined to the large diameter, I now need to turn the compound slide a few degrees to machine a taper to replicate the original lugs. To do this, I loosen 2 nuts up underneath the compound slide, move it around 3 or 4 degrees, and do them back up. I'll do it just by eye until it looks right. With the angle set, I tighten the 2 clamping nuts and use the compound slide handle to cut a taper. After several cuts, the angle is machined and it looks just right. I'm really pleased with that. So now we can drill and tap a hole in the centre and cut it off to length. I first use a centre drill to drill the centre of the bar. This ensures the drill will drill nicely down the centre and not wobble off line. So with the centre drill drilled, I replace it with a 6.8mm tapping size drill from M8 thread. With the hole drilled, I can now cut the thread. The last thing I need to do is set up my parting off blade and part off the new lug to 30mm long. So that's the first lug finished. So now we screw a bit of screwed rod into the fork leg so I can screw the new lug onto the thread to align it in the correct place, and I can mark it with a pen prior to cutting. With the lug screwed up tight till it hits the fork leg, I can carefully mark with a marker pen to the profile of the fork leg so I can cut that with a saw and file it down to fit nicely, ready for welding. Because of the tapered shape of the new lug, I screw a cap head bolt into the end that I can grip that in the vise really tight to cut with the saw, because it's really hard to grip a tapered shape in the vise, it just slides out. With the sawing complete, I can now use a file to file the shape down to the line. So now it's all ready to trial fit on the fork to see how it looks. So I offer it by eye first and it looks just right. So now I'm going to put a bolt in the centre, screw it in tight, clamp it up ready for welding. With the new lug welded in place, it's now time to file it all up so you can't see it. This takes quite a while with various files to get the material smoothed down really nice. With the profile roughed out with a file, I finish off with some abranet cloth to make a nice smooth surface. I'm now ready to go outside and use my angle grinder with a flapper wheel to profile the front side of the fork to remove all the weld. I'm using quite a fine flapper wheel so it takes the material off really slowly so you have better control. You don't want it to dig in and take off more than you want. I glance across the garden and there's a pigeon watching me. I don't think he's very impressed with the noise, but I can't be bothering that much. He just drops down and has a nice drink. The profile's taking shape nicely now and it's starting to look really good. Just going to put nice chamfer around the edges and smooth it all off. And I think I'm ready for doing the next polishing stage. So back in the garage, I'm on the abranet cloth again to take off all the marks from the flapper wheel and give it a final buff over the whole fork before I go back to my shed to use my vintage buffing machine to give it a nice sheen. I don't want a gloss shine, just a nice sheen. Well, I'm really pleased with that. It just glistens in the bright sunshine. So let's go and offer it up to the bike and see how it looks. Initial indications are brilliant. That's going to fit just perfect. And now you can see you've got the two lugs at the front for the caliper and the inward pointing mudguard brackets. I removed the right hand fork leg from the bike and trial fit the new right hand fork leg because sometimes you can get a bit of distortion with the welding process, but this one slid on beautiful, a nice sliding fit, so I'm really pleased with that. So now I can go back in the garage and put in new fork seals and assemble the fork leg. The new rubber fork seals tap in nicely with a hammer, and once it's down flush with the top of the fork leg I use an old copper bush to tap it in all the way. This is very slightly smaller in diameter and allows me to tap the seal down nicely against the shoulder. Once it's right down, I can then put in the round retaining washer and wire clip. I make sure the wire clip is fully seated in the groove and then fit on the dust cover. So now we're ready for assembly and the fork can go back onto the bike. But first I'm going to remove the chrome cover from the wheel and fit the new disc. And here you can see the 4 tapped holes in the right hand side of the wheel, all ready to accept the disc. So the disc just slides straight on nicely and the 4 holes line up just perfect. So now I can put on the 2 tab washer sets and the 4 bolts and do them up tight. And then I bend up the tangs of the tab washers with my pliers. With the second disc fitted, I can now refit the fork leg and fit the front wheel back into the bike. And the right hand hose retainer from a Kawasaki S1 fits perfect to hold the new pipe. So here it is with the new discs fitted nicely. I had all the metal caliper components re-zinc plated. I've got new pistons and new seals and new brake pads, so it's now time to assemble the calipers. The brake caliper bodies have been ceramic coated, which is brilliant because it's both heat proof and brake fluid proof, and it's a nice satin sheen. So the first thing I do is put a little drop of grease inside the bearing sliders on the actual main brackets. Then I just check that the brake pad fits inside the bracket, because sometimes they're a bit tight, especially after plating, but this one fits in just nice and smooth, so I'm really pleased with that. I've got new seals and new pistons to fit, and these look amazing, really shiny and smooth, so they're going to work really well. I smear a bit of silicone grease onto the main piston seal. This helps it slide into the caliper body nicely, and it also helps to prevent corrosion in the groove over time. It can be a bit fiddly to fit, but you just have to sort of get it one side in, then make it flop across and slide down and it pops into place. And run around with your finger to make sure it's seated nicely before attempting to install the piston. I put a bit of silicone grease on the piston as well, just to make sure, and it helps it slide in nice. So with a bit of even pressure, it gently goes back and pops into place. I'm really pleased with that. So now we can put on the dust seal. I bought a pair of new stainless steel bleed nipples because the old ones are in really bad shape. But first I put a bit of grease on the thread just to make sure they don't seize in place. I tighten the bleed nipples tight to make sure they seat nicely in the caliper body. I offer up the outer brake pad. This has an anti-rotation tongue that fits into a groove on the caliper and must be aligned correctly. Then it's secured in place with a central bolt. You must make sure you use the correct bolt. If it's too long, it'll bust through the actual brake pad material and cause damage. I can now install the 4 rubber boots onto the main bracket. These just push on nicely and snap into place. The main bracket can then be orientated into the caliper body itself. It's quite a difficult thing to do. It sort of has to slide in and around and go past all the rubber bushes. But it does go in and it snaps into place eventually, and then you can put in the 2 long bolts. With long bolts in place, the nuts can be placed on the back and tightened. I then check that the main bracket slides nicely backwards and forwards, and then insert the last pad. This pad has to engage in the bracket and slide through, and this rests against the piston, and it all slides across nicely, and that looks really great. So that's ready to go on the bike. It's nice now spring's approaching and the flowers are coming out and the sun's shining. It's much better than the cold wet days we had of winter. So now I can get the caliper back on the bike. The right hand one slips straight on nicely and the 2 bolts go in and engage. I hear a tapping at the window. I think Tracy's trying to contact me. So I go back up the garden, and then Robin's having a wash in the bath as well as I go past. He's having a right old flap around in the water. He loves it in the water. And it's Tracy. She's got me a nice cup of tea. That's just what I wanted.
Brilliant, thank you. Lovely.
It's always nice to have a nice cup of tea while you're working. So now I can do up the right hand caliper bolts on my ratchet. That's nice and tight, but the caliper itself is still quite loose, which is nice. Sometimes when you do up the main bolts, the caliper itself goes really tight, and that's no good. The new left-hand caliper goes straight into place nicely, replacing the old S3 one I had on there originally. This is a KHG50 one-piece caliper. I then reconnect the hydraulic pipe. After a bit of reshaping, the new right-hand pipe fits nicely on the caliper and lines up exactly with the bracket where the hose is going to go. It's now time to fit the new right-hand hose. A new double-length banjo bolt allows two pipes to be bolted together onto the bottom yoke. The last thing to do is put in the brake fluid and bleed the system. This can take quite a while to get out all the air, but you know when it's all out, you get a nice firm lever. I always place an old towel over the tank first, just in case any drips go on the paint, because it can mark it very quickly. Due to the orientation of the calipers and the position of the pipes, the system self-bleeds over about a 5-minute period just by pushing the lever in and out and watching the air come up, and you can gradually feel the pressure getting better and better and better, and in the end you've got a really good feel. With all the air out of the system, I replace the rubber seal and screw on the cap, and that's it, job done. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I've just sent off the front header pipes to get them re-chromed, and when they return, I'll take the brake out and give it a good test with the new front brake. I'm sure it'll go really well, or maybe I'll post a video. Anyway, see you all soon.